Giving Junior Johnson, giving Junior Johnson another one because Junior Johnson was a team owner, and Junior Johnson was also a driver, but he decided to be a team owner. Darrell Waltrip drove with Junior Johnson in the late 1980s, in the 1980s, before he drove for Hendrick, before Darrell Waltrip drove for Hendrick Motorsports in the mid 1980s. And Darrell Waltrip did win the very first All Star race at Charlotte Motor Speedway, driving for Junior Johnson in the 1980s. Darrell Waltrip drove for Junior Johnson in the 1980 from 1980 to 1980 to 1985. And then he drove for Hendrick Motorsports, and he drove for number 17, which was first owned by Hendrick Motorsports. And then I think that 17 was also driven by Michael Waltrip in the late 1990s. But Junior Johnson was a team owner. He had multiple drivers drive for him. Jeff Bodine, yeah, yeah. I think he was a team owner. Junior Johnson was a team owner from I think he was a driver from the 1950s all the way up to 1960s, all the way up to the 1970s. Junior Johnson was a team owner from 1970 from the 1970s all the way into 1997. He had a monumental team. He had so many greatest drivers drive for him. But the greatest team, but not only it was Allen's time, it was Alan Kulwicki. It was Allen's time to shine in 1992. We're winning his first and only championship at Atlanta. Richard Petty would retire. Richard Petty would retire at the end of the 1992 season at that very same track. He done his final lap. He did one last lap at the Atlanta Motor Speedway to signify the end of the greatest career. The career of the king himself, Richard Petty. After 200 wins, 7 championships, and Richard Petty Richard Petty was the first and only driver to win the Daytona 500 7 times. No driver has ever won the Daytona 500 7 times, but one, and that was the king himself, Richard Petty. And then in 1992, Atlanta Motor Speedway, the Atlanta Motor Speedway had a totally different configuration. It wasn't like this configuration like we have now, a 1.5 mile quad. The Atlanta Motor Speedway was actually a smaller homestead. Back from 1969 all the way to 1996, the Atlanta Motor Speedway was a 1.5 mile oval. It was a regular oval. And the front stretch and the back straightaway of Atlanta Motor Speedway now was actually the front straightaway of Atlanta Motor Speedway back in 1992. And the back straightaway of Atlanta Motor Speedway was actually in the front stretch, which is now a dog leg shape, like Charlotte Motor Speedway and Texas Motor Speedway. Back when the Atlanta Motor Speedway was first built, and back in the 1992 Hooters 500, the front straightaway was not like that. The front straightaway was actually the back straightaway of Atlanta Motor Speedway in 1992. Atlanta was a totally different track back in the 1992 championship race in the Hooters 500. Back in 1997, the track was reconfigured into what we have now, a 1.56 mile quad oval. Sister track to Charlotte, sister track to Texas. Atlanta Motor Speedway is no doubt about one of my favorite tracks besides Daytona and Talladega. It produces great racing at Atlanta, and it also had a couple of dramatic finishes, like Kevin Harvick's photo finish, edging out Jeff Gordon in 2/1000ths of a second and a monumental photo finish. Kevin Harvick barely beaten Jeff Gordon to win his first NASCAR Sprint Cup Series race, which was then still the Winston Cup Series. Dale Earnhardt had the exact similar finish in the year prior, in the 2000 Spring Race at Atlanta. Dale Earnhardt barely beat Bobby Labonte in the same margin of victory as Kevin Harvick's photo finish at Atlanta. And then 2024, and it happened again. And guess what? It happened again in 2024, earlier this season. And this time it was not one, not two, but three drivers. It was a three abreast photo finish at that same track that Kevin Harvick beat Jeff Gordon in a photo finish. The same track that Dale Earnhardt and Bobby Labonte. Dale Earnhardt beat Bobby Labonte in a photo finish in that same race. A three-wide photo finish. Daniel Suarez got his first win of 2024. And I think that win locked him in the playoffs this year. The next gen car does a it races really well. It races really good in the cookie cutter tracks, in the intermediate tracks like Atlanta Motor Speedway. Even though it is at a super speedway package, it is still less than a super speedway. It's a 1.56 mile level. It's still an intermediate track. Even though it has the super speedway package. And we're racing there again this Sunday. And we're racing again this Sunday, and it's once again a playoff race. Atlanta Motor Speedway has been a playoff race before. It's not the only time. It has not been the only time it's been in the playoff. It has been towards the end of the season. It was once a championship race. It was once the season finale. The fall race at Atlanta was once a championship. It was once a season finale. All the way until 2002, where the season finale has been moved to Homestead, Miami. From 2002 all the way up to 2019, and then the championship race was moved from Homestead to Phoenix International Raceway. And the championship races will again be held at Phoenix to determine the 2024 NASCAR Sprint Cup Series champion. Which is by far, I'm not really a big fan. I'm not really a big fan of Phoenix being the race to decide the Sprint Cup Series champion, or the Xfinity Series champion, or the Truck Series champion, because in 2023, the Truck Series championship race at Phoenix. It was the worst championship race in the history of that series. A championship race does not need to be held at Phoenix. I'm sorry for the fans who like that idea of the championship race being held at Phoenix International Raceway, but I really don't think the championship should be held at Phoenix. At least not much longer. I mean, yes, but Phoenix, the racing at Phoenix is decent. But it's not as good. But the championship for the championship, it's not as good. It's not as thrilling as it's not as thrilling as Homestead, and it's not as thrilling as Atlanta. What I think should happen, I think the championship race should be moved back to Homestead, Miami. I mean, Homestead races really. It performs the exact same race. Homestead Miami Speedway actually performs the exact same racing as the old school Atlanta. Back when Atlanta Motor Speedway had its 1992 configuration. Homestead races exactly like that 1992 configuration of Atlanta. That's the reason why the championship Homestead Miami Speedway produces great racing. From 2002, from from the track's reconfiguration from 6 degrees and the turns all the way up to 20 degrees. It has to produce great. It has to produce great racing at Homestead Miami Speedway. That track, Homestead should be. It should. The season finale should return to Homestead. It doesn't need to be staying in Phoenix International Raceway. I mean, I'm not hating on the track at all, but it doesn't need to host a championship. It doesn't need to host this. It doesn't need to host the season finale. It should go back to Homestead. This is the this is the recap of what's gonna have of this weekend. In a small little discussion about last weekend's race at Darlington.